like a Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel, where once again it's time for another Sega Saturn review, with today's game being a racing game, more specifically a futuristic racing game known as Hi-Octane, very similar in style of that to Wipeout. Now this game originally saw release in December of 95 over here in the PAL region and also in North America before a March 96 release in Japan, and it also came out on the PC and the PlayStation. I think most people who'll be watching the demo mode currently playing on screen will agree that I have got my work cut out for me with this week's review. It's one of these games that is very easy to review, but isn't particularly enjoyable to do so. Now, like always, I'll be talking about how it looks, how it sounds, how it plays, content and lifespan, and of course whether Hi-Octane is a game still worth playing today, and if it's got the quality to make our Sega Saturn top 10, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, if it is so bad it features in our bottom 10. So once the main menu hits, you've got a simple choice between race and options. Heading into options, we can change a few things, with the most important things being the difficulty and the control option, which I will cover more about when I get to gameplay. So once you've selected your mode of play, you'll see there are 9 courses to pick from, each with a varying number of laps, and it also shows you the best lap score and the best race score for each course as well. When you go into your vehicle selection, you will see there are 6 vehicles to pick from, which all say that they have varying statistics, but actually when you play as the vehicles, you will realize they all handle the same and they all have the same top speed as well. And another thing to note is they all have the same hit detection. So like always, I'm going to start with visuals first, and when I say that this game was originally developed in 8 weeks using the Magic Carpet game engine, then you'll probably understand why it looks the way it does, because we have got low polygonal count vehicles which are made up of flat shaded polygons and look very unimpressive for December of 1995. And to go with that, we've got one of the worst draw distances in any 3D game I think I've ever seen, and what the developers have done to try and hide it is put huge thick layers of fog in the distance, which just looks disgusting if I'm perfectly honest. Now the actual quality of the textures on the tracks doesn't look too bad. They actually look reasonably good for 1995, and if the game didn't have such a terrible draw distance with huge thick layers of fog, I would say the courses look acceptable for the time that the game came out, but it's simply not the case, unfortunately. Now, you may well think as well that if the game has a really short draw distance, it should perform relatively well without any real slowdown, and you would be massively mistaken for thinking this, because whilst there is one car on the track, it doesn't perform too badly. As soon as there are multiple vehicles on the track, the game suffers terribly, very similar to hardcore 4x4 in that regard. And when the vehicles are all firing bullets at each other as well, the slowdown is terrible, and the game goes from being a mess to being an absolute nightmare. There is very, very little good that I can say about Hi-Octane in the visual department. So moving on to the sound effects and music next, and what I would love to say is that this game sounds brilliant and it compensates for its poor visual performance, but unfortunately if I said that, I'd be lying, because this game is seriously lacking in sound effects. When your vehicle scrapes along the wall, there is simply no noise whatsoever, and it's quite strange in all fairness. One sound effect that you will get very bored of is the sound of the CPU blasting their miniguns at you over and over and over again when they're behind you. It becomes ear-bendingly bad in my opinion, and it is very, very repetitive. Now, it would be great if the music was brilliant to offset this, but I feel the music is just this generic techno music that gets very repetitive very quickly. It's definitely not my cup of tea, but what I will do is what I always do and give you some examples of the music so you can make that decision for yourselves. So moving on to the gameplay next, and the most important thing to say here is to make sure that you have the control option box checked in the options, because if you don't, you'll be pressing up to accelerate, and that is not how I personally want to be playing this game. Now, with that box checked, you will have a standard control pad layout, an accelerator, a turbo boost, a missile button, a minigun button, and a button to change your view, and you will move side to side with the D-pad. It's a standard control pad layout, and it actually functions perfectly fine. One thing I will point out is that you need to take into account you can run out of fuel, you can run out of bullets, you can run out of shield on this game. So they're things that you need to be wary of, and they are displayed in the HUD, but I feel the HUD display is overly complicated. I think they could have simplified it, and it would have made understanding your actual levels of fuel and ammo much easier. There is a map in the bottom corner, and this is actually useful because it shows where you are and where all of the opponents are on the track as well. Now, in terms of actually how does it play, it's got a very light floaty control scheme that's a little bit similar to the original Wipeout, but it doesn't control particularly well. And the most important thing I'd have to say here is the game just doesn't feel exciting to play. There's nothing novel, nothing interesting, I feel, when you're doing these races. And probably the biggest criticism is the fact that the races are 9, 10, 11 laps long, and they just get very, very boring and very repetitive. If they were shorter and somewhat more exciting, I think it would be better to play. But unfortunately, as it is, whilst it's probably the strongest aspect of the game, the gameplay, it's by no means a great playing game. So moving on to content and lifespan, and we've got a championship mode which sees you progress through each race with points awarded depending on your performance, with the objective being to win the championship. We've got a single race game, we've got a clone race, which is a fancy name for time trial. The funny thing about this is when you look in the instruction manual, it says due to memory limitations, very long laps may not be able to be recorded, meaning that you'll just have to try and better your lap time. It's almost like they put that in there because they've not checked the game thoroughly before releasing it, and I think that sums up this game in general, to be honest. We've got a death match, which is obviously you against up to 7 computer opponents trying to be the last one standing. We've got a split screen 2-player mode, which is obviously always nice to have in a racing game. And we've got the hot seat mode, where you and up to 7 of your friends can take it in turns controlling a vehicle as you do a little bit yourself, and then it swaps over to the next player, which is very strange, and then you all do a bit of the race each and it tries to determine a winner. It's a very strange mode of play in all fairness. So there are actually quite a few modes of play here. The downside is, for me, that it's just not fun to play. It gets very repetitive, and obviously it's not very nice to look at, and it doesn't sound good either, and all of these things put you off wanting to play it. So whilst there's a reasonable amount of content, I guess, to see and possibly experience, none of it is fun. And that's the biggest killer for me, which pretty much kills the lifespan of the game. And obviously it does have a 2-player mode, but because the 2-player mode performs pretty poorly as well, I just feel there's not much enjoyment to be had with any part of Hi-Octane. As always, that leaves us with our final questions. Is Hi-Octane still worth playing today? Does it feature in our Saturn top 10? Or is it bad enough to feature in our bottom 10? Well, I don't think it will come as a surprise when I say that Hi-Octane is definitely not worth playing today. It looks poor, runs poor, doesn't sound particularly good, and is pretty boring to play. So there's nothing here worth visiting in this day and age. In fact, even when it came out, I wouldn't have recommended it because Cyber Speedway, another futuristic style racing game, was out on the Saturn, and that is a much better game than this. Or you could have waited a few more months over here in the PAL region and picked up Wipeout, which is also better than this. So I couldn't possibly recommend you go out and play Hi-Octane. Does it make our Saturn top 10? Of course not. It's nowhere near, but where it does feature is in our bottom 10. And it slides into our bottom 10 in 8th place. The real question was, is it worse than Hardcore 4x4? And I felt that it's actually a little bit better than Hardcore 4x4 simply because there's less slowdown in general in the 1-player mode, which means it's a more playable and ever so slightly more enjoyable game to play. That also means Mansion of Hidden Souls is no longer in the bottom 10 games on the system. It has escaped the misfortune of being in the bottom 10. But of course, these are just my thoughts and my thoughts alone. Did anybody out there pick up Hi-Octane upon release, whether it was on the PlayStation, the PC, or the Saturn? And did you find enjoyment with this game? Let me know with a comment down below. And like always, I'll be back in the near future with another Saturn review. Goodbye for now.